Hello and welcome to a new podcast that I'm doing here that I'm going to call Bills Gameday Breakdown. Here we're going to break down the new matchup that your Buffalo Bills will be heading into in Miami for Week 3, as well as go through the other games around the NFL, give my thoughts on those, and pick the winners of each games. Bills won on Monday night against the Titans very convincingly. It was a fun night. All who were in attendance had a great time. All who watched on TV, myself included, had a great time as well. And the Bills are riding high coming into their Week 3 matchup in Miami. Another team who's riding high coming into Miami is the Miami Dolphins. The Dolphins are 2-0 following an improbable fourth quarter comeback against the Ravens in Week 2, led by Tua Tagovailoa's 469 passing yards and 6 touchdowns, leading them to a come-from-behind victory and making them 2-0. This is going to be a big test for the Dolphins, I think. I have not been a big believer in Tua Tagovailoa. I think he's been just an average quarterback throughout his career, but this offense has a lot of new playmakers on it now. Tyreek Hill has been producing. Jalen Waddle is making big plays. Chase Edmonds has been an explosive running back for them. And it's produced on the field. They're also extremely well coached. First-year head coach Mike McDaniel has done a phenomenal job with them through 2 weeks, leading them to 2 wins. But they're going to have a big test against this Bills defense, which is coming in banged up in the secondary. Dane Jackson is likely going to be out, I think, with a neck injury. Micah Hyde is also not practicing due to a neck problem. Jordan Poyer now isn't practicing either for some reason. He's got a foot thing. He didn't practice yesterday. And this is a Bills secondary that's already been pretty thin with the absence of Tre'Davious White. So you do have some concerns coming into this game if you're a Bills fan with that secondary matching up against Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. We know what Hill can do, and Waddle is looking to take a big leap in year 2. I do have to give credit, though, where credit is due to Tua Tagovailoa. He played extremely well last week. And we all kind of thought as Bills fans coming into the season that Tyreek Hill wouldn't be as productive because he didn't have Patrick Mahomes throwing him the ball, but that really has not been the case. Tyreek Hill has still been very productive this season. He had a good week 1, and he just went off in that fourth quarter against the Ravens in week 2. So it would be hypocritical, I think, to say that Tua doesn't deserve any credit for that. With what everyone has been saying about Hill possibly taking a step back due to the downgrading quarterback. So I will give Tua credit for coming out these first 2 weeks and playing very well, but I'm still not entirely sold. I don't think Tua is quite as good as how he played last week. I think he's probably just a step below that, but I am at least more open to the idea of this Dolphins offense being more dangerous with the playmakers that they have and with that offensive line. For the Bills to win this, I think this is going to have to be another big Von Miller game, a big Gregory Rousseau game. Ed Oliver might be coming back. He'll need to have an impact as well. If the Bills are going to win this game with how banged up their secondary is, they're going to have to put pressure on Tua. And I think they have the horses to do that. Von Miller's come in. He has looked phenomenal in his first 2 weeks. Gregory Rousseau looks like he's taking a big second-year leap. Boogie Basham is making plays. He has 2 takeaways in the first 2 games. This is a revamped and much more dangerous Bills pass rush. And if this had been last year and the Dolphins were playing this well, and the Bills still had last year's defense, I would be a bit more concerned. But I'm not really, because this is a much more improved Bills defense, especially up front. They can stop the run. They held Derrick Henry to just 25 rushing yards last week. So I'm still pretty confident, even though the Dolphins are coming in on a hot streak. I'm still very confident that the Bills have the horses to win this thing. I do think it has potential to become a shootout, and I think it's going to be a big test for Tua Tagovailoa to see if he can keep up with that. And I'm not, like I said, I'm not closed off to the idea of Tua potentially getting better with the playmakers he has around him, but I still think the Bills have more juice on offense to win these types of games. But what I'm most concerned about with the Bills is if this does become a shootout, this could potentially be a close game. And last year, the Bills didn't win any games that were decided by less than one touchdown. So that's something that's a little bit concerning. If this becomes a close game, how are the Bills going to respond? But I'm still confident that they're going to win this game. I think it's too early for the Dolphins, and I think Tua is going to be due for a bit of a come down from that massive high that he had a week ago. So I'm picking the Bills to win this game. You probably already knew that, but yeah, I think this is going to be an interesting game, and I do think it has potential to become to be a real shootout, especially with how banged up the Bills are on offense, or I mean defense. So that's my thoughts on the Bills. I'm going to move on to the other games right now. And I think I'm going to get started with the Monday night game, which is going to be the Cowboys versus the Giants. The Giants are riding high right now. They're an unexpected 2-0. I don't think anybody had them leading the division at this point, but they've done it off the back of some very solid coaching. They're probably one of the better coached teams in football right now, I would say. Their discipline, especially on defense, has been impeccable through two games. This is a team. They don't have a ton of talent, especially on the defensive side of the ball, but they've been coached up to play kind of above their level, I think, and that's what's carried them to these wins. They've also had the benefit of a pretty easy schedule. The Titans game is looking a bit more easy than it did a couple weeks ago with what we've seen out of them, and the Panthers also, I don't think, are going to be a very good team either. And it's a nice setup for them to go 3-0 as they're going in. They're going up against the Cowboys, who are going to be without Dak Prescott. But this Cowboys defense is going to be the difference maker, I think, that led by Micah Parsons, who's been one of the best players, period, in the NFL through 2 weeks, I think. And Daniel Jones, I don't think has played particularly well. I think they've been winning more in spite of him, but I am picking against hope here. I think the Giants find a way to win this one, and because I believe in this Giants coaching staff. I look at this Giants team, and I see a lot of the 2019 Bills with its new coach, its new quarterback. The Bills weren't getting particularly good quarterback play that year out of Josh Allen. He was still kind of figuring himself out that year, and was still kind of limited in what he could do. But they were incredibly well coached. They had the benefit of of one of the easier schedules in the league that year, and that propelled them to 10 wins and a playoff spot. And I see a lot of that team in the Giants right here. They've got an easier schedule. It's set up well with the Cowboys offense that is still trying to find itself, and I don't think Cooper Rush is going to play this well all the time. I think at some point he's also due for a come down. I mean, the guy's only started 2 games for this team, and he's won them both. But as the regular starter, I have a hard time seeing him just continue to win games like this. So I'm going to go out on a limb here, and I'm going to pick the Giants. I believe in Brian Daboll. I believe in this coaching staff. I believe in this team. I think they can be a contender for the playoffs down the stretch. Next game I'm going to pick is going to be, I'm going to go with the Packers and the Buccaneers, the Sunday night game. Is that the Sunday night game? I forget. No, the Broncos is the Sunday night game. So Packers is in the afternoon. Huh, okay. But yeah, this is a game. This has potential, I think, to be a pretty ugly game between these two teams. The Tampa Bay offense has quietly not been very good these first 2 games. They struggled to put points on the board until the first second half against Dallas. It took them to the third quarter to score a touchdown, and they only scored 1 touchdown in that game. And against the Saints last week, they also only scored 1 offensive touchdown, if I'm not mistaken, because they had the pick six as well. They might have scored 2, but still, that was a pretty tough game to watch against the Saints for a while there. Neither offense was really able to do anything, and the Buccaneers have won these 2 games off the back of their defense, which is very strong, and the play of Leonard Fournette in their running game. And it's been a pretty similar formula for the Packers as well. They don't have a lot of they don't have a lot of weapons in their passing game except for Randall Cobb and their tight end. I'm forgetting his name. Tunyon. Tunyon is his name. Robert Tunyon. But outside of that, they got a bunch of rookies who have kind of struggled through the first 2 weeks. Romeo Dobbs hasn't been as productive, and Christian Watson has really not been a big part of their game plan at all. They've also been relying on their defense and their running backs to carry them. A.J. Dillon and Aaron Jones had a really good game against Chicago, but they're going up against probably one of the more dangerous defensive fronts in Tampa Bay. So I see this being a pretty low-scoring affair, and I'm not necessarily looking forward to watching this one. But if I had to choose, I'm going to pick with my heart here, and I'm going to say that the Packers find a way to win this game. I'm just not really all in on this Tampa team. I think they're lucky to be 2-0 right now with the way their offense has played through 2 weeks. I think I'm going to go with Jags Chargers as the next game here. I'm kind of intrigued by this matchup. The Jaguars, maybe it wasn't a surprise for a lot of people because they just always beat the Colts in Jacksonville, but the Jaguars do look genuinely improved in a lot of areas. Trevor Lawrence had a good game last season. He's developing very real chemistry with Christian Kirk, his wide receiver, who everyone kind of laughed at in the free agency for how much money they paid him to come to Jacksonville. But he is earning that contract right now. He's playing extremely well, and Trevor Lawrence and Christian Kirk have a very real connection. Travis Etienne is also coming on strong in his technically it's his second year, but it's his first year actually playing. But he's making plays out of the backfield as a pass catcher. They have some very interesting pieces. Now, there's still a lot of deficiencies, I think, with this Jacksonville team. I don't think they're going to be able to beat the Chargers, who's one of the more complete teams in football. But I do think they at least have what it takes to make this an interesting game. I think this could potentially become a shootout as well. But the Chargers, they're coming off a loss to Kansas City in which Justin Herbert made a critical error in throwing a 99-yard pick six, which ended up really sealing their fate in that game against the Chiefs on Thursday night. It was and that was kind of uncharacteristic for him. We're not really used to seeing him make those kinds of just game-breaking mistakes. I don't see him doing that again, though, because Jacksonville's defense still leaves a lot to be desired. They don't really have a whole lot of playmakers on that side of the ball except for Josh Allen, their pass rusher. Um, so yeah, I think this is going to be a Chargers win, and the Chargers defense, I should say too, shouldn't have much of a problem holding Jacksonville down. I think, but it's a good test. It's a good measuring stick for the Jaguars for us to all see kind of where they actually are. We know the Colts probably aren't very good, and Jacksonville just always has their number. But I think this game will be an interesting game to see where even they don't even necessarily need to win, but even if they're able to keep this game close and be competitive by the end, we might be coming away from this game thinking there might be something brewing in Jacksonville. Next up, I'm going to go with the Rams at Cardinals. The Cardinals coming off a season-saving comeback against the Raiders in week 2, winning that game in overtime. That game had potential, I think, to really sink the Cardinals season, especially how they got their doors blown off in week 1 by the Chiefs. Their defense looked like an ultra disaster against Kansas City, and it was looking pretty rough too against the Raiders through 3 quarters. But or not 2 quarters. That was a second half thing, not just a fourth quarter thing. But they're going up against the defending Super Bowl champions who got their get right game against the Falcons. They almost blew that game. It was they were up 28-3 and almost let the Falcons come back and win that one. Jalen Ramsey, to his credit, made a great play to intercept that ball and seal the game for them. But I can't help but feel a little bit concerned for this Rams team at this point with the way they've performed these first 2 weeks. That should have been an easy win against the Falcons in week 2, and then they got thrashed by Buffalo in the opener. But this will be a good test for both teams, I think. The Rams really need, I think, to just have a convincing victory, and this is a Cardinals team that I think can provide that. I'm still not sold, even though their defense did clutch up and keep the Raiders off the board in the second half of that game, and they did make the play to win in overtime. I'm still not. I still have questions about this pass rush. And this secondary, which is prone to giving up explosive plays, and but on the other side, I still have questions about the Rams' passing attack. I'm still not seeing the connection with Allen Robinson, who was their big offseason acquisition. Cooper Kupp is going to get his catches and he's going to make his plays, but who do they have behind him is really my question right now. They're not really running the ball right now. Their pass protection still hasn't really proved much. I mean, they got just worked over by the Bills, and they went up against the Falcons, who really don't have much in terms of a pass rush. So I still have questions on both sides of the ball here, but I think I have to pick the Rams here because I think they have. I just think they have more what it takes. I trust their players more than I trust Arizona. I've kind of got one foot out the door with Kyler Murray at this point. Even though he had a phenomenal second half against the Raiders, I just need to see more out of him before I can fully trust him again. I'm still not really over that meltdown that they had at the end of last season. Next up, I'm going to go with Eagles at Commanders. So I think I have to give my apologies to Eagles fans. At the start of the season, I was not sold on them. In fact, I think I may have even stated that I don't even think they should be the favorites to win the division. I was wrong. I've been proven. I've been proven definitively wrong through 2 weeks by Jalen Hurts and this Eagle attack, and I also greatly underestimated the impact that A.J. Brown would have on this offense. He has just been going off for this team through 2 weeks, and They're going up against a Commanders defense that has been surprisingly inadequate, really, for a whole season now. And coming into this season, last year they were not a very good defense, and this year they look even worse. They just got absolutely demolished by the Lions last week. That was a pitiful performance by Washington's defense, and they're also getting quarterback play that is subpar from Carson Wentz, but I think we kind of expected he would be a bit of a liability at times for them. This Washington team is trying to build themselves the way that last year's Colts were built, in the way that they would rely on their defense to keep them in games, and then their superstar running back to carry them to wins and kind of hide Carson Wentz and his inadequacies behind in the pocket and limit his mistakes. But the problem is they have not been able to defend anybody on defense. They can't run the ball right now, and the result is that it's not even that they can't run the ball, it's just that their defense constantly puts them in these positions where they have to throw the ball to get back in these games, and Carson Wentz just doesn't have it in him to put a team on his back and get them back into games anymore. I mean, we saw it in the week 1 game against Jacksonville. Carson Wentz will just make these absolutely brutal decisions that will lead to turnovers, and if he has to play from behind, which he's been doing very consistently. They were lucky to come out of the Jacksonville game with a win. Jacksonville kind of tripped over themselves and handed the game back to Washington. That game was more of a that game was more of a both teams trying to lose more than it was either team really taking over. And then last week they just got completely rolled over by the Lions. I think there's trouble in Washington right now, and I think the Eagles are going to roll in this one. I'm not fully on board the hype train yet, but I do think they go 3-0, and they will be in control of this division after this week, I think. So I'm going with the Eagles. Next game, I'm going to go with Chiefs at Colts. Probably the game I am... Really, the rest of these games I really have no particular interest in, but the Chiefs just being... I'll have an interest in this game just as a Bills fan, seeing where the Chiefs are at this point, going up against a cornered animal in the Colts, who have looked shockingly bad through 2 weeks. They were lucky to get out of Houston with a tie in week 1, and then they just absolutely rolled over against the Jaguars. That game was horrendous. You could make the case that the Colts are just the worst team in football right now. And I wonder at what point do the Colts end this parade of just old washed up quarterbacks coming in to try and carry them to the playoffs. They did that with Phillip Rivers. They did that with Carson Wentz. And now they're doing it with Matt Ryan. The only difference now with Matt Ryan is that their offensive line has been terrible through these first 2 weeks, which is a surprise because the last couple weeks, their offensive line was the strength of their team. That's why they've been able to run the ball so well with Jonathan Taylor, and that's really what's been carrying this team into contention through these last 2 years. But to start this season, this offensive line has been absolutely trash. They have not been able to protect Matt Ryan. He's been under duress constantly, and he, much like Carson Wentz before him, has just looked completely lost and makes really bad decisions with the football when he's under pressure. And this is also in tandem with a Colts defense that's okay, but they're not the Colts defense that in years past have been able to just will teams to victories when the offense isn't producing. And it's definitely not a defense that I think is going to be able to hold down Patrick Mahomes and this Chiefs offensive attack, which I also have to apologize because I said in week one, I don't think this team got any better. I actually thought they had gotten worse with the loss of Tyreek Hill. I did not think Juju Smith-Schuster was an upgrade to Tyreek Hill. I did not think Marquez Valdez-Scantling was a upgrade at wide receiver either. But if it's possible, this team has actually looked even better with the absence of Tyreek Hill. This Chiefs offensive attack looks a lot more intentional, I think. They're really trying to, and I mean that in the sense that like when they had Tyreek Hill, they would essentially just streak Hill down and have him beat guys with his sheer speed, and Patrick Mahomes could just throw it up to him if he was in trouble, and he could rely on Hill or Kelsey to make plays for him. But now that he doesn't really have that, they've been a lot more intentional with scheming guys open, putting guys like Smith-Schuster and Valdez-Scantling in positions to be successful, and getting Patrick Mahomes to get rid of the ball quickly and get the ball to his playmakers in a more timely manner. And I think that's made this Chiefs offensive attack a lot more dangerous through these 2 weeks. Granted, I would argue they haven't really played anybody yet. I mean, they did have a close call against the Chargers, and it was a defensive play that actually won that game for them. But you also look at the fact that Patrick Mahomes had 3 interceptions wiped off the board by very questionable officiating, in my opinion. That game, I think they were kind of lucky to come out with a win, but they're not playing the Chargers this week. The Colts are just walking into a buzzsaw here with how bad they've been playing and going up against a Chiefs team that, much like the Bills, if you don't come ready to play, or if you don't have the talent to hang with these guys, they will just wipe the floor with you, and I think that's what's going to happen here. This is one of my easier picks of the week. I'm picking the Chiefs, and I don't think it's going to be very close. I'm going to go Ravens-Patriots here. I'm going to go to the I'm going to check in on one of the AFC East opponents here. I like this matchup for the Ravens. They should have won last week. That was a colossal for as good as Tua played in that fourth quarter. That was also a colossal meltdown by the Ravens defense. A Ravens defense that historically we have not seen that level of collapse from. And that was a game that the story of that game should have been Lamar Jackson just absolutely carving up the Dolphins secondary like it was like a Christmas ham. Through 3 quarters, Lamar Jackson just looked dominant, and even in the fourth quarter, he scored that touchdown to make it 35-14. And then the floodgates just opened from there. So this is a potential for a get-right game for the Ravens. I'm still not sold on the Patriots. I think I'm not sold on Mac Jones. I'm not sold on this offense, to be specific. I think their defense is pretty good, and I think it's the primary reason why they will be able to win some games this year. But this is still an offense for the Patriots that is completely devoid of any playmakers. I thought the addition to Devontae Adams might give this team a little bit more juice. It didn't. In fact, they actually look worse in a lot of areas. And I think they had the benefit of playing a Steelers team last week that is even more talent hungry on the offensive side of the ball, and is down one of their biggest playmakers on defense with TJ Watt not playing last week. So that I think they benefited from a bit of a lighter matchup against the Steelers team that just isn't very good. And now they're walking into a buzzsaw with Baltimore, who just who is going to be wearing that fourth quarter meltdown on their sleeves, and they're going to come in with a chip on their shoulder, and they're going to look to beat the brakes off this Patriots team, and I think that's what they're going to do. I'm picking the Ravens in this one. I don't know how I lost. I don't know how I lost this one in the shuffle, but Lions Vikings I think is an interesting matchup. The Vikings looked just really bad against the Eagles on Monday Night Football. It was another all-time Kirk Cousins disaster in prime time, and that was coming off of a pretty impressive win against the Packers. But even going back and looking at that game, that was a game that you felt like the Vikings really should have been able to run away with, and they really didn't. I don't think they scored any points in the second half of that game, and so I'm concerned for the Vikings going into this game for their ability to close out football games, especially going up against a Lions team that has been surprisingly dangerous on offense. They've put up more than 35 points in both of their games this season, and they're riding high. They may be playing a little bit above their level at this point. They're not a particularly talented defense, but they do have pieces that I think really show promise if you're a Lions fan. Amon-Ra St. Brown looks like a genuine number one receiver for this team. DeAndre Swift has just been killing it in their running game. And on the defensive side of the ball, they have Aiden Hutchinson, who just wrecked Washington a week ago. This is a Lions team. They may not be the most complete team, but they definitely have some very explosive playmakers, and they have an offense that's led by Jared Goff, who so far has not made the critical mistakes, has not been holding this offense back the way I think he was a season ago. And I think that's going to be a very interesting matchup, especially like I said, this isn't really a great defense, and I think the Vikings are going to have opportunities for Justin Jefferson to have a big bounce back game. So if this becomes a shootout between Justin Jefferson and Amon-Ra St. Brown and DeAndre Swift, versus Dalvin Cook, I'm there for it. I think this is going to be a very exciting game. I almost don't know who to pick. This is really kind of a toss-up. My heart wants to pick the Lions in this one just because I really like what they have going with that coaching staff. I was not a believer in Dan Campbell a season ago, but these first 2 weeks have really showed me something with him. I think I think he really is taking a leap forward in his second year as a coach and as a coaching staff. But I also I also like the Vikings coming off a pretty embarrassing loss in prime time. Kirk Cousins does play well on Sundays. That's just a fact, and I think he's going to be, and I think this is going to be a bounce back game for Justin Jefferson. The Lions just don't really have the talent in their secondary that the Eagles did that allowed them to put the clamps on Minnesota's big playmakers. I think this is going to be a high-scoring game. If you're a betting man, take the over in points on this one. But I'm going to go with the Vikings on this one. But I'm gonna be rooting for the Lions. If I'm wrong on this pick, I will be more than happy to take that L. So that's really the last. I guess I'll go with the Sunday night game next. I'll pick Niners. I'll go with Niners and Broncos. This is a Broncos team that I think easily has the worst coaching through 2 weeks. This the coaching job that Nathaniel Hackett has done these first 2 weeks has just been a masterclass in how to put yourself on the hot seat in record time as a head coach. Nathaniel Hackett has just been absolutely disastrous in big game decisions. We saw in week one that tremendous that horrific clock management at the end of the game, setting up Brandon McManus for a 64-yard field goal when you still had a minute left in all your timeouts, not going for it on 4th and 5 with your $200 million quarterback is just inexcusable to me. And then the clock management last week got to the point where you actually had your home crowd counting down the play clock for you because they did not have faith in your ability to manage that clock on your own. It's just been a stinging indictment on how horrifically managed this team is. And I think it's also a cautionary tale on how bad coaching can just absolutely sink an otherwise talented roster, because this is not a Broncos team that is devoid of any talent. They've got Russell Wilson as their quarterback. They've got Cortland Sutton and Jerry Jeudy as a 1-2 punch at wide receiver. And on the defensive side of the ball too, they've got Patrick Surtain, who's been injured. I don't know what his status for this game is, but this is not an untalented Broncos team. But the way they've looked through 2 weeks under this, I think falls on the coaching staff here, because they've just looked so bad. If they were playing any other team besides the Texans a week ago, they would have lost that game handily. I watched the highlights of that game, and it was a train wreck. Their red zone offense, they have not scored a touchdown yet inside the 20-yard line, which is inexcusable when you look at the talent on this offense. I don't know what to say. I don't know how I can convey just how bad this Broncos team has been through 2 weeks. And your quarterback, I mean, I don't know what the deal with him is, but he just looks checked out. He does not look like he wants to be there right now. He's less willing to run around and scramble the way he used to in Seattle. I just don't see a spark with him through these first 2 weeks. And I mean, Russell Wilson, he hasn't been bad, but he also hasn't been very good. And I think that's why I think this falls more on the coaching staff than it does on the players, because a better coaching staff could get more out of this Broncos team. But I think but I mean, with that rant aside here, looking at it from the other side of the ball, you're going up against a Niners team that I think has a very comfortable position here. I mean, I obviously I feel for Trey Lance and the fact that his season is over, but you just got the sense in that game against Seattle last week that this team is more comfortable with Jimmy Garoppolo behind running the controls instead of their essentially rookie QB. It is going to change, I think, how they run the ball, but you just got the sense that this offense is more in sync with Jimmy Garoppolo as their quarterback. So I think the 49ers are going to win this game. The Broncos, they're lucky to have a win at this point. They should be 0-2 right now, but they had the benefit of playing the Houston Texans, who are in an even worse position through 2 weeks than they are. I could ramble on for several more minutes about just how bad the Broncos are. Again, this coaching staff has been the coaching decisions has been inexplicable to me, and I am going to hesitate picking the Broncos to win many more games in the future as a result until we start to see some tangible improvements in that area. So I'm going to pick the 49ers here, who are much better coached. Like, I think we're going to see the dichotomy between what a well-coached football team looks like with a well-coached football team with talented players on it looks like against a poorly coached football team with talented football players on it. And This is another strong defense for the Niners as well. I don't see how the Broncos come out of this with a win, and uh, if the Broncos do lose this game, especially if they lose it by several points, I think I think there's going to be a very real pressure on Nathaniel Hackett going forward. But I've already spent way too much time talking about this game. I'm going to move on now. I'm going to move on to Raiders Titans. These are two kind of wounded animals coming in that are going to be playing for their seasons here. The Raiders have looked surprisingly bad, especially last week in that second half meltdown. They really should have waltzed to victory against a Cardinals team that really just looked listless on defense. And the Titans just, I mean, this is worst case scenario if you're a Titans fan. Uh, I mean, you probably expected the loss to the Bills, but dropping that Giants game just could not happen. If you were going to lose to the Bills, you absolutely could not lose to the Giants in week one. And that was supposed to be like your gimme game before you came in to face one of the top contenders in the league against Buffalo. And so far, both of these teams have just been very underwhelming. There was expectations put on both of these teams with the Raiders signing Devontae Adams. He was supposed to give a spark to this offense. He's looked rather pedestrian through these first 2 weeks. And on the Titans side of the ball, obviously there was expectations because they were the number one seed in the AFC a season ago, albeit in my opinion, kind of an artificial one seed, but still a one seed nonetheless. But the same deal with the Titans. Your star running back from a season ago that really carried this team and this offense just has looked incredibly average through these two games. And if Derrick Henry is, and this Titans offense is in a state right now with its wide receiver core, which features a whole bunch of no names at this point. The state of this Titans offense is so that if Derrick Henry just isn't running for more than 100 yards and multiple touchdowns a game, they're just not moving the ball right now. And that is not a formula for success. And I think they're going to be in for a rough season as a result, especially with their defense and how banged up that is now. Bud Dupree went down in the Bills game. Christian Fulton, their number one cornerback, didn't play last week, and I don't know what his status is for this week. But this is a Titans operation that's just completely underwater right now, and Mike Vrabel just does not look like he has answers. And same deal with the Raiders. Their defense somehow looks worse. Their defense has actually looked quite disastrous at times, especially against Arizona in that second half where they allowed them to come back and tie that game. This is I don't even know who to pick because these are two teams on a very similar trajectory right now, and that trajectory is straight down. I'm going to kind of deviate. I think here. I feel like you know what? Actually, I'm gonna look up the odds. I'm curious to see who the favorite in this game is in the betting. But if I had to pick, I feel like I would want to pick the Raiders here just because I do think they have more playmakers on offense. But these are two teams through 2 weeks have just done what they could to lose games, and this is kind of a toss-up for me. Whoever loses this game and goes 3-0, I think their season's pretty much over at this point. I don't see how either one of these teams come back from an 0-3 scenario. Did you look up the odds? Yeah, I'm curious to see who Vegas has favored in this game because it looks like it looks like Vegas is a 3-point favorite in this game, which That kind of surprises me. I have to be honest. I'd have thought Tennessee would have been favored in this one. So the Raiders are home favorites or are road favorites against the Titans, which is kind of surprising to me. I think that kind of confirms my pick that the Vegas Raiders will win this game and the Titans will be pretty much dead man walking after this week. Next up, I'm going to go Bengals at Jets. I'm intrigued by this game. The Jets won a game that they really didn't have any business winning. You can make the argument with the Browns that Nick Chubb should have just gone out of bounds and bleed the clock out. But I mean that was still, even with that, after Nick Chubb scored that touchdown, and even after Cade York missed that extra point, the the win probability for the Browns at that point was at 99%. That was just an all-time meltdown by the Browns that the Jets were the beneficiaries of a week ago. But the Bengals come in here not looking much better. They did come back to tie to tie it up against the Cowboys, and they ended up losing on a last-second field goal. But there are some real issues with this Bengals roster right now. Their offensive line, which they invested a lot of money in through free agency to try and improve and protect Joe Burrow, has allowed 13 sacks through 2 weeks. That is unbelievably bad. It does not get much worse than that for an offensive line. And they are going up against a Jets defense that does have some players that can rush the passer. So it looks like this could potentially be another rough game for Joe Burrow, but I'm still not sold on this Jets team. Like I said, it took an all-time meltdown by the Cleveland Browns for them to come out with a win last week, and they're still rolling with Joe Flacco, who I don't think is going to play as well as he did every week. I think the Bengals get right in this game, and I think they come out with the win, so I'm going to pick them in this one. But I will say I am intrigued by the Jets now. I'm at least more open to the idea of them not being terrible, but I think when it all comes to, and I think if Flacco can put them in a position where they're 500 when Zach Wilson comes back, then I think you can look to this Jets team as a Jets fan with some legitimate encouragement. But I don't think this is going to be one of those games. I think the Bengals find a way to win this one. Next up, we'll go Saints at Panthers. The Panthers are a team that has been greatly disappointing. If you're a Panthers fan, I think most people outside the Panthers fan base kind of saw this coming with this team, in the sense that Baker Mayfield has not elevated this offense the way that we thought he would, and the and the Panthers defense, it's kept them in games, but we've seen time and time again when Baker Mayfield is in a big spot with this offense, he just hasn't been able to deliver. And it's not, I don't put that week one loss really on him. I mean, he did what he kind of had to, he did what he had to do. He got them down to score, and they ended up losing on a last-second field goal. But I don't put that on him. But in that game against the Giants a week ago, I just wonder if the Panthers had better quarterback play with the pieces that they have with Robbie Anderson and Christian McCaffrey. I just wonder if this would be a game if the Panthers had someone better to play their quarterback position. And I think that's going to be the thing that holds them back this season. And then they're going up against a Saints defense that has been very good through 2 weeks. They held the Bucs to just 3 points through, I think it was 3 quarters of football. It was the only reason that they were even in that game. But Jameis Winston is another quarterback that I think is going to hinder this team's hopes throughout the season. He played well in week one, but week 2. It just kind of came back to the same old Jameis Winston, a guy who, much like Carson Wentz, is going to make killer mistakes in big moments. And so it's going to be a question of which version of Jameis Winston do we get in this game. I think we get the good version of Jameis Winston. This is they're not coming in against a Panthers defense that is particularly good. They're pretty middle of the road, and Jameis Winston at least is able to make plays against not so great defenses. So I think the Saints are going to win this game, and I think the Panthers are going to fall to 0-3. Let's see, we've got 2 games left, Texans and Bears and Falcons at Seahawks. I'm going to start with Falcons Seahawks. The Falcons, bless their hearts. Falcons fans, I feel bad for you. I don't know how you go through this type of thing week after week. The 28-3 narrative, obviously we all know what happened in the Super Bowl, 28-3, blew that. And then you were down 28-3 and almost came back to win that game. But even that, the football gods couldn't allow to have happen. They couldn't even allow you to have that little feel-good story where you finally break the curse of 28-3. Jalen Ramsey comes in and rips that game away from you on the last drive there. I like the pluck that you showed in the fight to come back and make that a game again. But I think the Falcons are probably in for a rough season, as are the Seahawks. Geno Smith, it was a nice story in week 1. You beat Russell Wilson in the game that everyone was kind of handing to him as the Russell Wilson revenge game. Geno Smith coming in and making himself the story of that game was a good feel-good moment. But last week against the 49ers, we kind of came back down to earth, and you just kind of got walked off the field in that game. These are 2 teams that I think are going to struggle, 2 teams I don't think are really going anywhere this season. I am going to pick the Seahawks, though, just because I have more faith in the Falcons to find new ways to lose games than I do in the Seahawks' actual ability to find ways to win. And I think they're better coached, too. I think Pete Carroll is one of those coaches that can get more out of a subpar roster than most coaches. So I'm going to give this to the Seahawks here, but I don't see any of these 2 teams being competitive down the stretch. And then that brings us to the last game, 2 teams that I also don't think are going to be very competitive down the stretch. I really don't think the Texans are going to be competitive at all. Texans-Bears. The Texans, I mean, what can you say? They just have not been very good. Lovie Smith playing for the tie in week 1 in a game that you were up 20-3 against going into the fourth quarter. I think that just tells you all you need to know about what you can expect from this Texans team. And then not even scoring a touchdown against the Broncos a week ago. Like I said, if I said in the Broncos segment that if they were playing any other team, they would have been beaten handily. They were lucky to go into that game against a team that's as talent poor as the Texans are. You're starting Davis Mills as your quarterback. He's like a 6th round draft pick. That is not a recipe for success, and he's got absolutely no playmakers besides Brandon Cooks on that offensive side of the ball. And you come in looking at the Chicago Bears. They can't, no one really had any expectations for them here either, but they're 1-1. They got their they got their biannual drubbing from the Packers a week ago. I do think they bounce back in this game. I at least think the Bears are going to be good enough to at least beat the bad teams that they have to play. I think they're good enough to beat the Houston Texans of the world. But I don't think they're going to be good enough to be competitive in this division or even be in a position to make the playoffs. So I'm going to pick the Bears here to wrap this up. I have to wrap up here. My computer battery is starting to run low, but thank you very much for listening to this podcast. If you like this format, please let me know, and I will try to make it a regular weekly thing. This is more of an experimental situation that I'm trying for this week. So let me know what you think. Comment below. If you'd like to subscribe, I'd be very grateful for that. I'm shooting for 100 subscribers by the end of the year, and I'm only 3 away from that now. So if you want to help me get to that goal, I would greatly appreciate it. But until then, I will see you in the next video. And as always, go Bills.